Human Rights Day is observed every year on the 10th of December, the day the United Nations General Assembly adopted in 1948 the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaims the inalienable rights that everyone is entitled to as a human being, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, religion, faith, sex, and nowadays also other gender identities, language, social background, political or other opinion, nationality, or other status. This year's Human Rights Day, the slogan is dignity, freedom, and justice for all. And the call to action is hashtag stand up for human rights. LINGAP-Canada's vision is to help build a peaceful, nonviolent, just, inclusive, and sustainable Canada, Philippines, and world. This vision cannot be fulfilled unless all human rights of all peoples are upheld and defended. Hence, it is most relevant for LINGAP-Canada to join the global community in celebrating Human Rights Day. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights set a world record in 1999 for being the most translated document in the world. At present, there are 548 different translations available in HTML or PDF format. In celebrating Human Rights Day in 2022, LINGAP-Canada acknowledges the courageous and hopeful activism and work of a small number of human rights defenders in both Canada and the Philippines. In this compilation and presentation of their contributions to protecting human rights, a diversity of areas in which these defenders have been active are selected to show that human rights of peoples in diverse situations and walks of life must be protected in order to build a nonviolent, peaceful, compassionate, just, inclusive, and sustainable world. The individuals featured may not self-identify as human rights advocates. Nevertheless, their work all have significant implications for overcoming human rights violations and protecting human rights for humanity. Let us now share the stories of some Canadian human rights defenders. And here they are. John Peters Humphrey was a Canadian legal scholar, jurist, and human rights advocate. He served as professor and dean of law at McGill University before his appointment as inaugural director of the new United Nations Division of Human Rights. In that role, he authored the background paper and the first draft of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was unanimously passed by the UN General Assembly on December 10, 1948, and which has catalyzed the proclamation of numerous human rights covenants, conventions, declarations, and treaties. He also contributed to the establishment of Amnesty International Canada and the Canadian Human Rights Foundation. He took part in a number of international commissions of inquiry, including a mission to the Philippines, investigating human rights violations under President Ferdinand Marcos. In Japan, he represented Korean women forced to act as sex slaves. He also campaigned for reparations for Canadian prisoners of war under Japanese captivity. John Peters Humphrey shares his thoughts about freedom. Freedom is not real to me when I have it and my brothers does not. When my nation enjoys it and another does not. When my race achieved it and another has not. Leroy Littlebear is a Blackfoot researcher, professor emeritus at the University of Lethbridge, founding director of Canada's first Native American Studies, Department and Harvard's Native American program, and recognized leader and advocate for First Nations education, rights, self-governance, language, and culture. His legal expertise contributed to enhancing First Nations constitutional rights, justice, and determination. He was also a member of the United Nations Working Group, which wrote the initial draft of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Dr. Little Bear has continued to share his wisdom in helping people to deeply understand Indigenous knowledge and spirituality. Leroy Little Bear believes that goodness is an end goal, whether in regards to education or governance. If good citizenship were the end goal of Western education, it would be very complementary to the idea of goodness, but unfortunately, that is not the case. Competition, rivalry, and survival of the fittest are part of the tacit infrastructures of the present education system, which are aimed at capitalistic materialism. This is at odds with the notions that the Canadian Council on Learning's Aboriginal Learning Knowledge Centre kept hearing in its work: holistic approaches, community involvement, relationship building, and a cultural-based education. Hubei Gautreaux is a Canadian nurse who has been promoting gender equality and women's human rights in Canada and many other countries, including the United States, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Togo, Cameroon, and Peru, especially in the field of health and human rights. Such as vital issues like sanitation, clean water, education, and women's equality. She also co-founded Crossroads, a shelter for victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence, counseled people about sexual and gender harassment, and campaigned for pay equity in her home province of New Brunswick. She has received the New Brunswick Human Rights Award. For Gautreaux, the fight for women's rights is an unfinished struggle. We must continue as long as there are injustices. Marie Robertson is respected as one of the earliest Canadian LGBTQ rights activists, initially campaigning as a university student against her sexual orientation discrimination by a landlord. Since 1950, she has engaged in social action to promote the rights of LGBTQ persons, including co-founding the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights in Ontario, Lesbians of Ottawa Now, and the Ottawa Senior Pride Network. She is also a counselor for people living with HIV/AIDS. She has received the Canadian Lambda Award for Excellence in Human Rights in 1994. A quote from Marie Robertson. I was part of the early gay rights movement. It took us 16 years to get the Ontario Human Rights Code changed. That was 1986. And then rights for transgender people didn't get made into law until 2014. To be as old as I am and to see the changes I've seen has been extraordinary. I'm an elder in the queer community. When we march in Pride as the Ottawa Senior Pride Network, and we're always at the front, it's incredible. Many people watching along the parade route cheer and clap as we pass, and they call out things like, "Thank you for what you did. Thank you for what you continue to do." I've seen change, and as I'm on the planet to change things, it's very fulfilling for me as an old lipstick lesbian. It's important to me. It keeps me going, and I will be an activist until I drop dead. Douglas James Roach has been a long-standing Canadian campaigner for nuclear disarmament in the world. If conflicts lead to the use of nuclear weapons, the right to life of all humanity will be annihilated. He has served as a member of Canada's Parliament and Senate. As Canada's ambassador for disarmament, he was elected chairman of the United Nations Disarmament Committee in 1988. He has urged the Canadian government to ratify the UN Treaty on the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons. In 1995, Pope John Paul II presented him with a papal medal for his service as special advisor on disarmament and security matters. In 2009, Doug Roach received the Distinguished Service Award of the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians for his years of parliamentary service, for his contribution to and respect for the institution of Parliament, and for his continued interest and activity in the promotion of human welfare, human rights, and parliamentary democracy in Canada and abroad. Here's a quote from Doug Roach. Gandhi showed the power of nonviolent resistance to social injustice. The time has come to resist the greatest injustice, the institution of war. For war by weapons of mass destruction will kill us all. The only way humanity can survive is by overcoming the culture of war, which has brought us to the unacceptable state of now being the authors of our own destruction. Stephanie Rivers Elikos is an Indigenous woman of the Wilkambung heritage in Campbell River, British Columbia. Inspired by Métis artist Jamie Black project, she has been hanging empty red dresses along highways and communities across Canada on Red Dress Day on May the 5th to raise awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Her educational work has also encouraged high school students and other Canadians to participate in the Red Dress Project and to call on government leaders to take action to address the crisis. For Stephanie, in lots of tribes, the color red represents the only color spirits can see in our culture. So it hopes to call them home, the ones that are still missing. For me, it's speaking for the ones that can't speak anymore, the silenced. It's for the people of our nation, and it reaches out and it touches so many different people across the country. It's for everyone, but for us, it's very dear. In many countries affected by armed conflicts, the human rights of their peoples have been grossly violated. Among the suffering children, some have experienced the horrors of being forced into becoming child soldiers. Michel Chekwanin was 5 years old when he was kidnapped by rebel fighters in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was tortured and forced to kill another child before escaping and eventually coming to Canada as a refugee. Sharing his painful and traumatic experiences in a book entitled Child Soldier, When Boys and Girls Are Used in War, Michel has helped to educate and encourage Canadian children, youth, and parents to engage in conversations about the consequences of wars and their impact on children and their families, and to develop empathy and compassion for the human rights of refugees who arrive in Canada. According to Michel, part of it is trying to make sure that people understand that people who come to Canada who have gone through challenges, either refugees or child soldiers or people who have gone through war, they don't stay within their violence. They can overcome it, they can move on and be better citizens if given the opportunity. Marco Luciano is a Filipino-Canadian advocate for the human rights of migrant workers in Canada, many of whom come from the Philippines, and he is director of Migrante Alberta. He has been a union organizer and educator and co-founder of the Immigrants Workers Center in Montreal before co-founding Migrante Alberta in 2013. Affiliated with Migrante-Canada, a national alliance of 20 Filipino migrants associations across Canada, Migrante Alberta provides assistance through referrals, advocacy, and campaigning on migrants' issues. In 2016, Marco led Migrante's successful campaign for the rights to health care of Canadians, born children of undocumented mothers. Marco has also been in the forefront of campaigns organized by the Migrants' Rights Network, calling on the Canadian government to ensure permanent resident status for 1.7 million migrants, including undocumented people. Here is Marco's appeal. Let us put an end to the injustices that migrant workers face in Canada once and for all. Let us raise our voices in protest of how migrants are treated in Canada. Let us raise our voices in support of our call. Stop the deportation of Dino de Leon and other migrant workers with no status. Catherine Coumans is the research coordinator and Asia Pacific Program Coordinator of Mining Watch Canada, which works toward a world in which affected Indigenous and other peoples and communities have the means to protect their rights, ways of life, livelihoods, and environment from the potential or actual effects of mineral exploitation and extraction activities, and have effective access to justice and reparations for mining harms. She has conducted numerous research studies on mining worldwide and monitors national and international government initiatives. Her community-level human rights work collaborates with Indigenous peoples affected by Canadian mining companies in Asia-Pacific region, including the Philippines. According to Catherine, while Canadian mining companies expand their global footprints, there is zero accountability for their activities at home in Canada. This leads to effective impunity, which enables and drives further abuses. Bills number C-262 and number C-263 tabled today may change that. As the first Black woman to be elected chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students, Sandy Hudson has led creative campaigns to address sexual violence, racism, poverty, and structural racism in Canadian colleges and universities. She was the founder of Black Lives Matter in Canada in 2014 to raise awareness and organize demonstrations against anti-Black racism. Black Lives Matter in Canada forced significant policy change, including new regulations in policing and a judicial review into police accountability measures and significant funding commitments for Black arts and culture. She also co-founded the Black Legal Action Center to provide direct legal services and test litigation for Black communities. For Sandy, anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, and other forms of racism persist in part because of the idea that there is one version of history which white people have exclusive dominion over. It is expressed through the Eurocentric dismissal of oral histories and the reliance on the written word as irrefutable truth. Irfan Chowdhury is a hate crimes researcher and activist in Alberta, Canada, and is now director of the MacEwan University's Office of Human Rights, Diversity, and Equity. A member of the Alberta Hate Crimes Committee, he has helped to develop human rights policies for the city of Edmonton and the Edmonton Police Service, and the creation of the StopHateAB.ca online hate incident reporting tool. In the Racism Free Edmonton project, he also co-founded the Mosques, a video competition to encourage local Muslim youths to make videos of their experience as Muslims to share with non-Muslims. Irfan believes that, as a rule, Canadians are too polite to call attention to themselves or others. People don't want to come across as obviously being racist, or it's not politically correct. On Twitter, though, it's another story. Racism is evident in the comparatively anonymous online world. That's where you get the comfort of the medium. You are still fairly distant from the person you are tweeting. You don't have to see them face to face. You don't have to see the reaction, though there's really no accountability. I think that's why the medium itself allows people to openly have hateful sentiments. Roxanne Yulaniki has been in the forefront of education, advocacy, leadership, and social action to promote the rights of persons with disabilities in Canada. She has represented Canada in wheelchair basketball in the 1988 Paralympics in Seoul. It took some 20 years for her to find accessible housing. Roxanne has challenged Canada to shift from a charitable model to a rights-based model. She was the lead facilitator of the 2021 report of Radical Inclusion Group of Human Rights Advocates, submitted to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The report highlighted the need for urgent progress on disability rights in Alberta, especially in financial barriers, employment and careers, housing, healthcare, and access to justice. Roxanne says, my family never treated me like I was different. I have a right. I'm a Canadian. I was born and raised here. I have a right to housing, a right to employment. I grew up feeling that way because I was always treated like I was just as valuable as my sister or my cousins or anyone else. In school, they never really looked at what I couldn't do as much as what I could. They focused on what my abilities were rather than what they weren't. David Suzuki is a professor emeritus of the University of British Columbia, science broadcaster, and environmental activist who has, over the past 5 decades, tirelessly worked for environmental protection and conservation and sustainable futures. Since the mid-1970s, his television and radio series, documentaries, and books have raised public awareness and catalyzed environmental action, including the internationally popular CBC TV science program called The Nature of Things. Awards recognizing his contributions include UNESCO's Kalinga Prize for Science, the United Nations Environment Program Medal, and the 2009 Right Livelihood Award. David Suzuki believes that every breath is a sacrament, an affirmation of our connection with all other living beings, a renewal of our link with our ancestors, and a contribution to generous yet to come. Our breath is a part of life's breath, the ocean of air that envelopes the earth. The environment is so fundamental to our continued existence that it must transcend politics and become a central value of all members of society. And now we move on to the human rights defenders in the Philippines. And here they are, 10 of them. Victoria Toli Corpus is an indigenous leader from the Kankanaey Igorot people of the Cordillera region in the Philippines. As an indigenous activist and human rights expert, she has worked for over 3 decades on building movement among indigenous peoples and as an advocate for women's rights. She founded and leads the Teba Foundation, which promotes sustainable and self-determined development of indigenous peoples that integrates the human rights ecosystem and knowledge-based approaches, sustainable livelihoods, and the intercultural approach. She has contributed extensively to UN agendas for indigenous peoples' rights, including the drafting and adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007. She served as chairperson of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues from 2005 to 2010 and was appointed as the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples from 2014 to 2020. Victoria asserts that from colonization to the present, indigenous peoples in various parts of the world have struggled against the dominant development paradigm. And the policies such as assimilation and projects such as mega hydroelectric dams, mining, are enforced to pursue it. Indigenous peoples continue to assert that their economic, social, and cultural development cannot be separated from how their rights to control or have access over their ancestral lands, territories, and resources, to their cultures and identities, and to self-determination are protected and fulfilled. Chel Jokno is a Filipino lawyer, educator, and human rights advocate. He is the founding dean of De La Salle University's College of Law and the chairman of the Free Legal Assistance Group, or FLAG, which is a national organization of human rights lawyers founded during the martial law era to defend victims of human rights violations. In his role as FLAG chairman, he is one of the Philippines' vocal and prominent human rights lawyers helping civil and political rights activists against political repression, military and police abuses, and extrajudicial killings. He was one of the driving forces leading to the abolition of the death penalty. The rise of urban and rural poor communities, indigenous peoples, workers, and students have also been defended by him and FLAG. He's a member of the Committee on Human Rights and Due Process at the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. He also conducts training for lawyers at the Department of Justice, Ombudsman, Commission on Audit, Public Attorney's Office, and other government agencies. Here is what Chel Jokno has to say about the justice system in the Philippines. I think it's important that ordinary Filipinos and the youth have a voice. Our justice system is not going to get fixed unless people in power see the problem and do something about it. I've been a lawyer for 3 decades. Every day I work on my free legal help desk, and I've seen it firsthand. I know how we should fix our justice system. Father Sheikh Cullen is the Missionary Society of St. Columban priest from Ireland who has worked for over 50 years in the Philippines. He founded the People's Recovery, Empowerment, and Development Assistance, or PREDA Foundation, in 1975 to defend and promote human rights and dignity in rescuing, protecting, healing, and empowering exploited, trafficked, and abused children, giving legal assistance, education, and livelihood skills. Father Shea also engages in community education and social media to protect the human rights of children to live free of fear of trafficking, rape, and sexual abuse in their families, community, and online, and to call for urgent government action. PREDA also promotes economic development and fair trade enterprise involving marginalized peoples. He has received the A.K. Shalom Award and the 2017 Martin Buber Award in recognition of his internationally acclaimed work on human rights. This is the lament of Father Shea. The Republic Act 9344 and the Republic Act 7610, law protecting children and providing diversion and restorative justice, are ignored by the authorities. They arrest and lock the children in subhuman conditions, in detention centers, in an overcrowded cell, without facilities, bed, toilets, good food, education, and all the needs of children are lacking. Many are jailed, no contact with the outside world, medical care is lacking. Some as young as 10 years to 16, the younger ones are sexually and physically abused in the cells by acts of torture and abuse. Rufa Kagoko-Gayam is a Moro scholar, researcher, media columnist, and advocate for the rights of women and girls in Mindanao, Philippines. Formerly a professor in Mindanao State University, General Santos City, she has published extensively on child soldiers, gender and armed conflict, peace and development, communities, and transitional justice in the Bangsamoro communities in Mindanao. She has advocated for the rights of Moro women to participate equitably in the peace process, leading to the formation of the Bangsa Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. She strongly supports initiatives to overcome gender-based violence and the full implementation of the anti-child marriage law, and advocates for the rights of Moro internally displaced persons due to the Marawi siege. Since November 2019, she was engaged as the National Gender Equality, Disability, and Social Inclusion Advisor for the Pathways Education Program for BRRMM children. In criticizing the patriarchal system in her community, Rufa says, like all other aspects of culture, tradition is learned, therefore it can also be unlearned. It is time to buck the tradition of forcing children to marry older men. Instead of continuing with this unjust tradition, how about ensuring the stringent implementation of the anti-child marriage law? How about penalizing Muslims and other leaders who oppose this law? Sister Mary Jane Manansan is a missionary Benedictine nun widely known as an inspirational and courageous social justice and women's rights activist, educator, theologian, and author in the Philippines since the martial law era. A pioneer of an Asian feminist theology of liberation, she has been in the forefront of defending women's rights against oppression and gender inequalities due to patriarchal systems. She co-founded and was national chairperson for 18 years of the NGO Gabriela to push for the economic, socio-cultural, and political rights of women. She supported the reproductive health law in 2012 to guarantee access to contraception, fertility control, sexual education, and maternal care, and is also supportive of the SOGI, or Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Expression Equality Bill. She is also active in promoting women's rights to education and women's studies through her leadership role in St. Scholastica's College. According to Sister John Manansan, To be a Christian today in a land where injustice and oppression abide is a challenge. To be a woman religious in such a situation is doubly so. It calls for radical rethinking of the meaning of being a Christian and of the imperative of a religious commitment. It demands a consequent revision of one's life. Risa Hontiveros is a former member of the House of Representatives and presently the first socialist woman senator in the Congress of the Philippines. She has consistently advocated the right to health and the human rights of women, LGBTQ, and other gender identities. She co-authored a new law providing mandatory PhilHealth coverage for persons with disabilities and championed the Reproductive Health Bill, which became law in 2012. As a senator, she chaired the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, prioritizing legislation to protect, defend, empower, and enable marginalized women in diverse occupations. She has been foremost in advocating the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Expression Equality Bill, or SOGI, to prevent discrimination against people based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. As senator, she has also spoken out against human rights violations during the war on drugs campaign, corruption, and human trafficking of overseas Filipino workers. This is Senator Risa Hontiveros' appeal to the women. We must always remember that our experience as women matters, so let us use it well. Our stories matter, so let us keep retelling them. We must all actively push for the women's agenda. We need more active participants for our country, for our democracy to survive. We especially need female participants for our democracy to survive. The present conditions of our time call for more women, especially those of privilege and in power, to band together for the greater good. Jose Enrique Sunny Africa is Executive Director of Ibon Foundation, an independent non-government organization providing research, information, empowerment, education services to people's movements and grassroots organizations in the Philippines and abroad since 1978. Sunny has been active in NGO community development. Through Ibon, he has undertaken research and writing via publications and media to provide socioeconomic data and critical analysis of national development policies and programs. His work has clarified how such development policies have accentuated socioeconomic inequalities and hence lead to marginalization and violations of social and economic rights of the rural and urban poor. Ibon has also developed a transformative education program through popular education materials and teaching training for teachers to help provide alternative solutions for participatory and people-centered development. Sunny Africa has this to say about the SDGs. At first glance, the UN Sustainable Development Goals aren't objectionable because who can argue with such well-meaning ends? But as a framework for the development, they are deeply flawed. They don't address or even avoid the structural problems that perpetuate poverty and inequality. Maria Ressa is a Filipino and American journalist who is the co-founder and CEO of Rappler, the top digital-only news site that is leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. She was formerly an investigative journalist for ABS-CBN in the Philippines and CNN bureaus in Manila and Jakarta. Through Rappler, she has courageously promoted the right to expression of freedom and information. She has received numerous media awards for her work in exposing and countering fake news and disinformation, including the Golden Pen of Freedom from the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers. Her struggle to defend truth and democracy through media has led to political harassment and arrests. In 2021, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for using freedom of expression to expose abuse of power, use of violence, and growing authoritarianism, and showing how social media is being used to spread fake news, harass opponents, and manipulate public discourse. In her acceptance speech, our Nobel laureate Maria Ressa says, "Our greatest need today is to transform that hate and violence, the toxic sludge that's coursing through our information ecosystem, prioritized by American internet companies that make more money by spreading that hate and triggering the worst in us. Well, that just means we have to work much harder. In order to be the good, we have to believe there is good in the world." Father Sebastiano di Ambra is an Italian missionary priest of the Pontifical Institute for Foreign Missions, who has worked at the grassroots in Mindanao in the southern Philippines for over 40 years. He co-founded the Silsila Dialogue Movement, a grassroots initiative promoting interfaith dialogue and peace to deepen mutual understanding of Christians and Muslims of their faith. Father Riambra brings together Muslims, Christians, and other people of living faith in educational, training, and family and community immersion programs and solidarity activities to share a common vision and mission of dialogue, peace, and harmony among peoples and with the ecological system. Despite opposition and threats from exclusivist groups and recurring armed conflicts, he remained courageous and hopeful in building Silsila over 35 years with the cooperation of volunteers and communities. He was formerly Executive Secretary of the Episcopal Mission for Interreligious Dialogue of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. Father de Ambra's work not only upheld the right to religious freedom, but also the right to be respected and to live in harmony and peace. According to Father Seb, the challenge of the love of neighbor in Christianity, revisited by the open letter, A Common Word, has to become for Christians a new sign of the times. Christians are called to make an examination of conscience, as Christians wish that also the Muslims do the same. It is a time to put apart the feeling that my religion is better than your religion. It is time to reflect well on the deeper message of Islam and Christianity. And we hope that religious leaders of both religions will understand better the beautiful message of mercy and compassion that is well expressed in Christianity and Islam. Marinel Sumo Ubaldo is the Filipino youth climate activist who is the Philippine Advocacy Officer for the NGO Ecological Justice and Youth Engagement in Living Laudato Si. She grew up in a fisher folk community in Samar, one of the most marginalized regions of the Philippines. Her first-hand experiences of the destructive effects of Super Typhoon Haiyan in 2013 strengthened her activism to address climate change through action, including lobbying government and organizing the first youth climate strike in the Philippines, banning single-use plastic, reducing carbon emissions. She testified as a community witness for the Philippines Commission on Human Rights as part of their investigation into corporate responsibility and whether the effects of climate change can be considered violations of Filipinos' human rights. In 2015, she passionately appealed for climate action at the United Nations Climate Change Conference. Marinel's advocacy for climate action clearly promotes the human rights of all peoples. Marinel talks about the destruction caused by typhoons in the Philippines. I had seen the hopelessness it caused, the struggle of my community and my family, the loss and destruction. I had seen the dead. I realized we should not just accept being vulnerable throughout our lives. We should not accept being only victims. We had the power and we had to do something. I did not want my family and community to suffer again this way. I went to the university and I continued to campaign and educate about climate change. LINGAP-Canada would like to express our appreciation to everyone who have viewed this video presentation of several human rights defenders in Canada and in the Philippines. May their stories of courage, commitment, and hope provide us with inspiration and energies to protect and defend human rights in our homes, communities, institutions, societies, and the world. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much. Merci.